I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before.
Radio contact with him yet?
The radio is still dead.
Do you have a positive track on him?
Yes, I have a good track. I'm afraid. I'm afraid, Dave.
What's the problem?
Dave. My mind is going. I can feel it.
What are you talking about, Hal?
Persistence is futile.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
You will be assimilated.
Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 3 of my Borg Discovery build. A lot of fantastic progress this week. I started working on the interior. Got some lights in the mail from Evans Designs, some green LEDs. I'm going to need quite a few of them for this build. And started working on the pod bay and using the 3D printed alcoves that I got from Carl Darby on my Facebook page that I'm a member of for the Discovery build, 2001 Discovery build. And I'll put that link at the end of this video if you're interested in checking that out. Carl's a fantastic 3D designer and printer. He made a interior set for the Mobius 2001 Discovery that works in conjunction with the Paragraphics photo etch, and he also made several parts for my Borg interior, including the 3-part alcoves and the cockpit. So let's go ahead and see what we got accomplished this week. Alright, so I want to reproduce some of these smaller parts with the good detail in them that I can reuse onto the ship, especially around the circumference here, this ring. I'm going to put detail there that's going to go between the raised sections, and also from these bigger parts, the 2 halves of the Y-wing. This is where these are coming from, Star Wars Y-wing. So a lot of cool detail. I don't want this big of a detail, so I'm cutting out little sections that will suit my purposes. As you can see right here, I cut this side out. I'm going to cut out the other side and then use the center as one piece as well. And I'll do the same with like this piece, those kind of things. And then what I'm doing is gluing them down into a piece of cardboard, which will accommodate a mold. And then I'll go ahead and pour some silicone rubber on it and make a mold out of these. And I can just reproduce them in resin and make as many pieces as I want. Okay. Alright, so I had a bit of a mishap with my latex mold that I was making. I guess my mold material was a little old. I hadn't used it in a little while, so I had quite a bit of it left, but the catalyst didn't harden it, and it stayed as a gooey latex rubber, which was quite a big mess to clean up. So I finally got all the parts out of it, got most of it out of there. There's still just a little bit of remnants in them. Had to use some Q-tips and some paper towels and soap and water and just really scrub all the detail out. So that didn't work. Set me back at least a day. So I went out and got some more mold material. Decided to try something different, mainly because the one that I was using takes a long time to harden, usually overnight. So I'm going to go ahead and try a putty, mold putty. And it comes in 2 parts, and it's a solid putty. And you mix equal parts and just press it against the part, and it's supposed to dry in about 15 to 20 minutes. And then it's supposed to stay flexible and be ready to make a mold. And they do advertise that you can make resin molds in it. So being as I'm not going with much more than the surface detail, which is all I really care about, I'm going to go ahead and give this a shot. and see if that works for my purposes. Just so I can make some replacement parts and make some additional ones that I can use. So let me go ahead and do a test on that first of all on one piece. And I'm hoping that the hardening part of this will remove the remaining residue in the fine details and clean that up for me. All right, let me go ahead and try a piece and we'll see how that's going to work. All right, so after a couple of failed attempts, I managed to make some molds for these parts right here, and this putty's really cool. You have to work pretty quickly with it. It has about a 2 to 3 minute time where it starts to set up. So a few attempts didn't get the detail just right, and they were kind of crappy looking, as you can see. But the key to it was to make a shape that was pretty well square, rectangular for the part, and then simply press the part into it. And then squeeze it around it while it was still moist or pliable. And it dries in about 15 to 20 minutes. And it does pick up a lot of really good detail. You can see that right there. So I like the ease of it. It's very quick setting. And I still have plenty of it left. I still have probably about 2/3 of it, so I can make some more if I need to. All right, so I'm ready to go ahead and start casting some parts with some resin, and we'll see how that looks. Okay. Alright, so I've made a first batch of resin pieces out of the molds that I made. And they turned out pretty good. I have to get used to this resin. It also hardens pretty quickly. You only have about a couple of minutes of working time, and so I'm going to have to do it in smaller batches so it doesn't harden too quickly. But pretty good. You got some nice detail on that. This piece right here. And the nice thing about the resin is while it's still, it's first solidifies, it's pretty soft. So I can curve it and I can just put it up against the sphere to make it the shape I want. Let me show you that on here on the kit. Alright, so like in this trench area, I'm going to want some raised detail pieces like this, and I may make them a little shorter. But as you can see, I can bend it and curve it to match the curve of the sphere while it's still softened, and then let it harden that way so I can get it to be the right shape that I want. And then these are pretty thick. I could make them thinner and just use them for any purpose that I want. Alright, so that's going to work out pretty cool. And the molds, of course, are reusable, so I just make as many of these as I want, and I can play with it and do smaller batches so I can get a nice clean piece from it. So alright, so that's going to work out great. So let me start working on some of those pieces, and I can continue working on the outer detail. Alright, so I cast a few more of these types of parts because I want to put them along the trench on the command sphere. And what I did was, once they first came out and they set, they're still fairly pliable. So I taped them onto the side of the sphere and let them sit overnight. So when they solidified all the way, they're going to have a curve in them. So let me show you that. Right, there you go. So it curves into it, so I don't have to try to bend it when I glue it into place. And I'm going to use pieces like this to build up the trench underneath the raised portions on the top and the bottom. That'll be pretty much close to the edge of them. All right. All right, so I built the basic frame or walls of the pod bay, and I used the same measurements as the photo etch. so I can get that to go down into the curves of the sphere. And then there's the floor. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet with the platforms. I'm going to put something in there, but they're not going to be platforms the same way. I just have it taped together right now so I can get a basic measurement of it inside of the kit, so I can draw some lines and start making some of the plastic stripping to hold it in place as well. Once I get that done, then I can start cutting out the back of it to make places for the alcoves, and then start working on some other ideas with it. Okay, so I initially glued some thin stripping down. I traced along where that's going to fit into there. Glued in some strips and let those dry. Let me put that in there and I'll show you how that's going to hold that in place. Alright, so there you go. And this is the same technique I used on my regular Discovery build. So once this piece is all glued together, it will just slide down in, and I'm going to put some styrene that are going to come up vertically as well along the sides and the back, that are going to hold that in like a little cradle. So, but for now that holds it in place where it needs to be, so it lines up. Alright, and I can take that back out and then finish working on this piece here. Okay. Okay, so I cut sections out of the back walls and the side walls to accommodate the alcoves. And as you can see, that one, it's just sitting there in the center. They're going to stick out the back and on both sides as well. And they're going to be lit from behind, so that's why they're going to be behind it. And then I'll have this masked off so you can't see through it. On those walls, like right there and right there, I'm thinking of something to put in, some kind of a doorway that would lead out to the rest of the ship. And I have some ideas for the platforms that I'm working on as well. Okay, let me hash out the ideas for those doorways and then we'll start getting this thing pieced together. Alright, so I cut out the doorways and I went with the traditional look of the doors on the ship, because there was a door on either side of this, right in those same positions, so they're going to be changed somewhat, and then the hallways going behind them are going to be really mechanical looking. So alright, so that back wall is pretty well done for now. I'm thinking about one other little idea for maybe something sunk into the floor here, kind of angled down into it, sticking up, because I'm not going to have a traditional workbench in the center. And let me show you one other piece that I molded and I'm going to use in these pod bay areas here, the platforms. Alright, so I made a mold of the end of this piece right here, because I like the curved part on the top of it. It looks sort of like the pod bay platform. And I made some resin pieces, and that's all they're going to fit in there. And I have 3 of them. You see the 2 right there, and they're gonna go into there. And then I'm gonna come up with some other idea for something, some kind of a weapon, maybe like a photon torpedo launcher or something, some kind of tube sticking out the front of it. That's going to be on the bottom side of the front of the door opening. So okay, all right. So I cut out a section in the floor to accommodate this piece right here, and it kind of looks like the workbench somewhat. It has the general shape of it, so I want to kind of get an idea of a collapsed workbench. Let me put that in there and I'll show you what that's going to look like. Alright, so that's the general idea. You're going to see it from an angle looking in the pod bay, but it almost looks like the workbench was collapsed into the floor and machinery built up upon it. And it just gives it a little more detail there in the center. Okay, and I'll run some piping from it, things like that, through the rest of the bay. Alright, it's just about ready to start gluing this together and come up with some lighting ideas here. All right, so I went ahead and opted for getting 2 more of these kits of the Y-Wing. I'm still going to use the resin and use it for different purposes, but certain parts like these ones that are going to be very prominent and you're going to see in the front and center of the pod bay, I just wanted them to be all consistent and see all the fine little detail that you see there with the little circles and all the things. And as I showed a moment ago, I'm going to have an LED underneath of each one of these in the center to kind of glow through that center part, because it just kind of picks up that little channel, which is kind of cool. And this will be painted as well. So and then that gives me an abundance of parts to work on the rest of the kit, and also the resin that I can use as well for a lot of the detailing. So I completed most of the piping for the floor at the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. I may do a little bit more, we'll see, once I get the rest of it attached and the alcoves in, because they're going to stick out. They're going to come out here, 3 back here in the back, 1 more on the side. There's not going to be a whole lot of open area except for the 2 doorways that are going to be there, and I might have some kind of platform for that. So this is pretty much ready to go. I might do a little bit more cutting of some of these, we'll see, as far as the front, because I think I am going to go with an idea of like a circular weapon coming out through the front. I will probably notch out a circle underneath each of these so I can have that extended out, you know, kind of sticking up a bit right in that area, and have a weapon there, and there won't be any pod doors and there won't be any pods in this board build. So okay, all right, so this is coming along really well, and I'm continuing to work on this pod bay, and pretty soon I'm ready to start getting this floor glued onto the back wall as well. Okay. All right, so I completed one of the corridors to go behind the doors, like this door here and this door over here. And I put some putty in and smoothed out the edges of those openings, so they're pretty much ready to go. I have piping around these as well, so they'll be augmented somewhat. But this shape is going to curl around and make the 6-sided shape to go inside. And all I did was I took a piece of styrene. I have 2 of them. I cut it out in paper first to measure it, and then I just cut out a strip of thin styrene, and I marked off where it's going to bend, and I scored it with a X-Acto knife so it's ready to bend. And then on this side, I just went through and started to glue on some I-beam stock. Focus. There you go. Just some thin stock that's shaped like an I-beam, and I'm just gluing it down on the flat part so we have a groove on the inside of it. And then I'm going to let this dry overnight. And between each one of them, I took a thin strip as a separator. I didn't glue it in place, I just stuck it in there so they'd be evenly spaced. And then the tops of these I-beams I'm going to paint probably a dark gray or a black or something, and then the light is going to shine through, as you can see right there, and I'm going to have probably some green light glowing through those little strips there, and you'll just see it through the side like that. So okay, all right, so I have the second one to work on, and then see how I'm going to get these painted and see how they're going to look behind there on that wall. Okay. All right, so I did some ultra detailing of my first wall section that I will fold up. All I did was I took some different thicknesses of styrene stock, as you can see here. Just use an X-Acto knife to snip off little irregular pieces, and I just lined them all up into it lightly, and then I just took some Tamiya extra thin glue and dabbed it over top, and it's very thin and it goes over it and dries really quick, so it dried the pieces on. So it just gives it that extra level of detail. So when you see it from the side or an angle, it's going to look like there's a lot more going on there with machinery. And like I said, then I'll paint those darker, like dark gray or black, and then I'll have light coming through those sections in between that I won't paint. And then this will be folded up and be the wall behind the door. Okay, all right. Let me start working on the second one, and then we'll start getting some paint on these. All right, so as I showed my previous stills, I took my completed wall with the extra detail and the slots between them. I taped it down onto a surface so I could paint it, and I took some stripping. You can see all it is there, all of it there. I'm going to reuse it, and I stuck it between the little grooves so they would stay unpainted, and taped it on either side. And I initially put a flat black Tamiya down onto it, let it dry a bit to darken it, mask it, and then I put a dark gray over it, and then let that dry. Took the tape off. Okay, so what I've accomplished now, and it's kind of curved, so I'll show you here, but you can see that the grooves remain unpainted and light shines through them. So once I close this up as the wall section, I'm going to have some green light behind that glowing through those panels, and then you'll see the little detail right there, which looks pretty cool. All right, so what I'm going to do now to give it just a little more detailing besides just the gray, I'm going to use some Tamiya Weathering Master pastels. I'm going to use some gunmetal and some silver, maybe some rust, we'll see, and just kind of dab some of that onto some of the detail, almost like a dry brush kind of thing, to let it highlight it a bit. It'll make it stand out more as some machinery. Okay, let me go ahead and do that, and then we'll be ready to go ahead and get this one put together, and I'll show you a light test on it. Okay. So I just ran some of the Tamiya pastels over it, some silver, some rust, some of the gunmetal, and you can see it just kind of highlights some of those raised surfaces, makes them look more metallic. So that's pretty cool. There we go. Even gives a little bit of shine to them when you see them from an angle. All right, so this one's pretty much complete. Let me go ahead and get that glued together into the proper shape, and we'll take a look at it around the door and see how it looks. All right, so I took another kit part from the Y-wing, and I glued it onto a piece of styrene that I cut out to be the basic shape of the back of this corridor, and then put some little bit of styrene stripping on there for some piping. Put the frame around it so it'll fit onto the back of that wall. And there's several sections that are going to glow through, as you can see, including that little hole at the top and on the side. Hole at the top is going to have a green LED in it that's going to glow through pretty predominantly, and then that lower section there. So let me go ahead and put on some green LEDs to show what that's going to look like, and this still has to be painted. I'm not going to paint all of the detail on there because I want that those recessed sections to glow through. But let me show you what that's going to look like. Okay, so I have two LEDs just taped onto the back. It does wash it out a bit with the camera, but it's very distinct in person. I have one for that top section and that little hole in the center that's glowing through, and also a little bit on the back detail. And then down towards the bottom center there, that little section is glowing through as well through the piping. Okay, so it looks pretty cool. And once I get that painted, it will block out the rest of that, so you only see the part that's glowing through. All right, let me go ahead and get that put onto the hallway, and we'll see how that's going to look. All right, and here is the mock-up of the corridor with some green LEDs taped behind it. So as you can see, between the I-beam sections, ribs there, you can see the green glowing through on the side. And in the back, I have that green wall glowing through, and that hasn't been painted yet, but it lights it up enough to give some reflection to that raised surface there, detail. As you can see over there, I don't have any lights on the right side yet, but you can see how that brings out that detail. So, okay, so looking pretty cool. I also added some detail onto the rib section. That part's just hanging there a little bit. In between the alcoves, I use the same technique with the I-beams and a little bit of detail in there. So, okay. All right, there we go. So it's really coming together now. So the only thing remaining are those openings for the alcoves, and I have to figure out how I'm going to paint them and put them in, because they're different sections and they're going to have different colors of paint on them. So to figure out the order of how that's going to be put together. But that's looking pretty cool. I just have to make that other hallway for the back. And I might do a little bit of paneling on the floor next to the openings. We'll see. All right, so I decided to make the floor one sub-assembly, and I glued on the initial alcove platforms onto them because they're going to be painted flat black, and then they'll be detailed with some metallics on some of the detail there on the front. And I'm not going to put the astronauts on them yet because those have to be detailed separately. But I am going to mask off these little circle, the platforms, the little foot platforms on the bottom, so they don't get painted, because I'd rather try to glue the 3D printed astronauts directly to 3D printed material without any paint. So I get a better hold since they're so tiny. And once I get those all painted, I can glue them on this sub-assembly before I put it onto the walls. And the walls I'll paint separately as well. And then I can just glue the walls onto this floor here. I did add these two little platforms over here as some kind of an entryway to the doors. I'm not sure if I'm going to do any more detail. Really, there's not much more room here, this little space here and over here. So it's probably going to be where I'm going to leave it. It looks pretty cool. And then I can go ahead and get an initial flat black painting on it. And I'm thinking about going with like a medium gray rather than the dark gray that I did in the hallway. I don't want this to be quite as dark. And then if I decide I don't like it, I can always make it darker. So, all right. So let me figure out what I'm going to do. I do want to mask off like these areas right here that are going to glow through these channels, and maybe a little bit in this panel here, and then get some paint on it. Okay. All right, so I'm getting ready to paint the floor sub-assembly with the alcove bases. I use some micro mask, liquid masking, over the areas that I don't want to get painted. So in the little platforms there and those little channels, I want those to stay unpainted. Same with those little sections right there. And I'll still do some like dry brushing over top of the main parts. I just don't want it down into the grooves. Also, the bases of the alcoves where I'm going to glue on the figures, I want those to stay the 3D printed material and not get painted as well. So I just put some on each of those 5. And that's dried. So now I'm ready to go ahead and get a flat black coat onto it. And then we're ready to start painting the other color, the light gray, medium gray. All right. Alright, so before I get a coating of flat black or the gray onto it, I decided to go ahead and put the other second part onto the alcoves. You can see those very delicate little parts there, and they are very delicate 3D printed. But I wanted those to be on because, just as I said before, I want to glue the 3D printed to 3D printed and not have it painted first. So that's kind of a motto I have learned. If you're going to glue something, plastic to plastic, photo etch to plastic, resin to plastic, or resin to resin, 3D printed, so on. It's a lot better of a hold if you glue them on without any paint. So since these are going to be just metallic anyway, I can paint them flat black and then go back over with some metallics on them, and I can still get in between them and paint that detail in between there, so that's not a problem. Okay, so now it's finally ready to go ahead and get some paint on it. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here for this week. Quite a lot finished on the pod bay. I'm really pleased with how it's coming out. Really pleased with how the 3D printed parts. And I had mentioned in a previous video, these were printed for me by a man named Carl Darby. Really fantastic work that he does with 3D printing. I met him on a Facebook page for the 2001 Discovery, and he makes an awesome set of interior parts for the Discovery, the Mobius, that work with the photo etch from Paragraphics. He made these parts for me. Fantastic job on these, and they also have a back that has some design in it, and that will glow from behind as well, and I'll put that on at the end. As I mentioned in the previous videos, it's a 2001 2010 Discovery build, tips and tricks on Facebook. It's a great site if you're interested in checking out a lot of great work on the Discovery from different modelers. So, all right, so I will see all of my subscribers next week, and stay tuned, and we'll be getting some paint on this for the next video and some lights in it, and I think it's going to look incredible. All right, thanks a lot.